Okay, so welcome everybody. David, alcoholic addict. We are in Bill's story, and fortunately, we are almost at the end of what David has been calling Bill's nightmare. We know we have a story, Dr. Bob's nightmare, but really pages 1 through 8 here are Bill's nightmare of his own. We're going to pick up, we got really through the last full paragraph on 8. We're just going to reread that last paragraph just to set up the context and transition into what starts on the very bottom of 8 and goes into 9. So everybody with me, bottom of 8. Here we go. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. And just to recap on this, I said it probably 5 times last week. I kept going back, Bill, just devolving, descending into the depths and greater and greater consequences and alcoholism, life falling apart, losing everything. He is about at the bottom here. Now into the new content. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we chartered an airplane to complete a JAG. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing an oasis. Drinkers are like that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's quite a few words in here that I'd like to define.
Good,
so
take your time.
The first one being musing. So musing meaning thoughts. So my thoughts were interrupted by the telephone. And then for alcoholic insanity, so the definition I found through the AA book was talking about, so alcoholic insanity is based on like an alcoholic's view of towards drinking, which is when they cannot see and act on the truth. But so the medical term for definition for insanity, which we actually don't use anymore nowadays. So definition is a term that describes someone with a severe mental illness to where they cannot distinguish fantasy from reality. And with alcoholism, we cannot differentiate the truth from the false when it comes to drinking.
Oh, and I should just say, for those of you who weren't here the last week, Ashton is not only serving as a dictionary person, but in her career, she is a nurse, the lead nurse in an intensive care unit. So she provides some extra awesome perspective on some of these medical definitions of these words. It's important for us to look in context, right? Sort of casual use versus how does the medical industry use these words today?
Thanks for that, David.
Mm-hmm.
So next word would be jag, and jag means drunk. So there was that time we had chartered on airplane to complete a drunk. I think maybe like a drinking spree is more of a better way to put it. And the next one would be oasis. Oasis actually means like a fertile area in the desert that allows plant and animal life to survive as it flourishes with a water source. So his coming was an oasis, that dreary desert of futility. So futility means uselessness. So his coming was basically a fertile area in the dreary desert of uselessness. I think that's all I got for that paragraph.
Awesome. Thank you.
So let's start at the bottom of page 8, 4th paragraph. As Ashton described, musing is just, he had deep thought. What was his deep thought about? Deep thought was about, where's my bottles at? Just want to make sure that I got them all in place for the rest of the night. Why? Well, he's in a really good position right now because Lois is at work. So he didn't got that fear creeping in when she's going to show up anytime soon. And then the old friend that we're talking about is Ebby Thatcher, his old school friend. They grew up together. Over to page 9 in italic writing, he was sober. Very important wording there. Here's one person in the room that's sober. The other one wasn't. That's Bill. It was years since I can remember his coming to New York in that condition. Probably never even happened before. Ebby was a real drunk. And Ebby's had a twin brother who actually was the mayor of Albany, New York. And they used to get him confused all the time with each other. And that's why later on, we'll get into some more detail about Ebby, but he was cast off to the house of the Thatchers up in Vermont just to get him out of there because he was causing so many problems in the family. Even in the business that they own, the Thatchers owned a car wheel company in Albany, New York, too, and they would supply rail car wheels for the cars that locomotives pulled. So, rumor had it he'd been committed for alcoholic insanity. Well, he wasn't exactly committed because of 3 members of the Oxford group. The 3 members were Roland Hazard III, Sebra Graves, and Shep Cornell. And 2 of those members, Sebra Graves and Shep Cornell, went to court on his behalf in front of a judge that was related to Roland Hazard. And basically what was said by the judge is get him the heck out of Vermont and keep him sober. So they brought him to the Oxford group, introduced him to the 6 steps of the Oxford group. And yeah, he got sober. Ebby did. We'll see what he looks like in upcoming paragraphs to prove that he was sober. And then it says later on in that paragraph, he says, I wonder how he escaped. Well, he escaped with the help of others. And in my experience anyways, in Alcoholics Anonymous, one alcoholic working with another is key. I couldn't have pulled this off on my own. So Bill's thinking that somehow he did this on his own. He did not do this on his own. Unmindful of his welfare, boy, that is typical alcoholic. Bill's just thinking as he goes through this paragraph here, it's like he just wants to recapture the spirit of the old days. Not interested in if Ebby's sober whatsoever. That's not what he's interested in at this moment, anyways. He's just interested in tying one out with his old buddy. And then it says they chartered an airplane to complete a jag, that intoxication, that spree, that fling, that binge, that craziness, as a matter of fact, they got so drunk when the airplane landed, they fell flat on their faces. That's the kind of drinking that they did. They were real drunks. So, as David started us out at, the first 8 pages of Bill's story is all about Bill's descent into hell. Let's call it that. And now we're going to get into, not quite yet, wait for it, but we're going to get into his recovery very quickly here as he starts to admit and kind of concede to his innermost self that he's a real alcoholic because of the introduction of that from Ebby to Bill.
Well, think about how it works, 58 and 59, right? Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. So we've gotten a large mouthful, bellyful of what Bill was like. And now we're going to see what happened and then who he becomes. And I just want to sort of underscore a few of the points that David made. I mean, he pretty much covered everything, but there's a few things here worth just sort of repeating. Emphasis. So Bill shocked that Ebby, who he used to drink so well with, and Joe and Charlie tell this story. I don't know if it's substantiated anywhere, but Bill had this perspective that if he ever drank as badly as Ebby did, then he'd know he was in bad shape and he'd have to clean up. And so now this guy that he epitomized as the drunkest of drunks is now calling him, he was sober, italicized, right? Bill's really moved by this, but unmindful of his welfare. What is our fundamental problem? Once we figure out we are brought in because of our alcohol or other problems, but what do we really learn? What's my biggest problem? Got this unmanageable life that stems from self-fear, self-pity, self-loathing, selfishness, self-seeking, self-centeredness, self. So that's all Bill cares about. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only recapturing the spirit of other days. I want to feel better at somebody else's expense. Anybody relate to that? My entire existence was built on this prior to recovery. And then his coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing in Oasis, drinkers are like this. Bill is so desolate and in such a hell, as David said, that he is now looking at other people drinking as his moments of salvation. Think about how sick and twisted that is for Bill at this point. The door opened and he stood there. So Ebby stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? Ashton, anything? Nope.
So the door had opened. He stood there with fresh skin and glowing. So my note in the book is something I don't have memorized, so I'm going to read it. So Ebby manifested himself there. So Augusta from the 4th century says, wherever you are, preach the good news, and when necessary, use words. Here he is. Bill looks at him and he sees something different in him. And the thing that he sees is there's something about his eyes. Go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and see if that's not true. Go to a meeting of Cocaine Anonymous and see if that's not true, of recovered alcoholics and addicts, especially if you've known them in the past. There's something particularly different about their eyes. He's fresh skin and glowing. We get healthy. What a great testimony to the human body, how it starts to repair itself. It really does. After a short period of time of abstinence, now we know that that's not enough, but I'm just saying that gets the body in motion to get a little bit more well. And he was explicitly different. What had happened? He had a vital spiritual experience. That's what he had. He'd done the work and had what they get from this Oxford group 6 steps, which you can find on page 263. And our 12 steps is the 12 steps says that we've had a spiritual awakening as the result. The result of these steps, he's had a spiritual awakening. This is what Ebby's had. He's standing right there in front of him, and he's showing him Ebby is showing Bill his soul. He's looking inside of him. Bill's not necessarily interested, but he can see through him.
If you haven't had this experience yet, if you're still holding on to those old ideas, bring an open mind as you read the big book. In my experience, I find so many parts of my experience, my journey, were written in this book from 1939. I had a similar experience, personal experience like this. 9 months sober, I went to my physician. He'd been my doctor for a long time, and he knew me really well. My mom was a physician, and they were colleagues. And I went in to see him, and he looked at me. First thing, didn't even say hi. He's like, "What's different?" And I said, "Nothing." He said, "Did you lose some weight?" And he checks my chart, looks at my scale. He's like, "No, you're about the same, 5 pounds." He's like, "Something's different. Something's different." I said, "I have been sober for 9 months." He's like, "That's it. It's it." He spotted it all over me. What he saw physically, I don't know. What he saw in my energy, I don't know. I've had this experience personally, and I cannot tell you how many hundreds or thousands of people, some people on this meeting today. Heather, I was talking about earlier. I've seen people transform physically, not to mention the energy they put off by having this spiritual awakening. I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had got into the fellow. He wasn't himself. "Come, what's this all about?" I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, "I've got religion."
Okay, so we got a great note from Howard here, so a little bit more authenticity. So Judge Collins Graves was the father of Sebra Graves. And then what he does, he remanded Ebby over to Roland because the judge has seen Sebra's alcoholic behavior get better. He hadn't quit, but was slowing it down. So he turned him over to them, get him out of Vermont, go take care of him. And Ebby went and did the work and got well. So back to the paragraph here. He pushed the drink across. He refused it, disappointed but curious. I wonder what had got into the guy, with this fellow. He wasn't himself. Again, what was different about him? Everything was different about him. Every detail about him, physically, mentally, and certainly spiritually. And then it says, he looked straight at me, simply but smiling. He said, "I got religion." Yeah, he got First Century Christianity Fellowship from the Oxford group. And it worked for Ebby. He was a testimony right in front of the face of Bill. Couldn't deny it.
And if you're new, you're going through the work for the first time, don't worry, don't be scared. This is just Ebby's experience. He had his spiritual experience, as David said, through the Oxford group, where he got a heavy dose of first century Christianity, and it worked for him. And not to mention, I've met many other people who came in with a particular faith that they had wandered from and they never had a spiritual experience through, and they blended that faith with 12-step recovery, and it worked for them. But religion is not a part necessarily a 12-step recovery. Spirituality required. Religion not required. What's Bill's response? I was aghast. He was aghast at Ebby saying, I've got religion. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspect a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right, but bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching.
So I have a few words here. So aghast would be taken aback or surprised. So I was surprised. And then crackpot means an eccentric or foolish person. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic, eccentric, foolish person. Cracked meaning eccentric or foolish. So now I suspected a little eccentric about religion.
Yeah, so we're not going to get into the whole story about Ebby this week, about what really happened instead of what the book is saying here, and I don't want to give any more information on that. But what happened here is Bill's making a statement. So bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last a lot longer in his preaching. Why? Because he says he's a little cracked about religion. He was on fire, all right. You're damn right he was on fire. Those guys talked till 1 o'clock in the morning. That's what they did. Dude, Ebby was on fire, man. He wanted to give this away to everybody. He knew that something different was about him. He had a personal relationship with his creator, and he wanted to share that with Bill, his old school friend. He was not shy about it. He just talked and talked and talked, and Lois was interested, and the other gal was interested, and they were just going on and on. But Bill's right. He had enough gin, to last throughout the whole thing. And this is the second mention of he had that starry-eyed look. Back in Dr. Silkworth, we talked about the way the eyes look too on page XXIX. So there's a mention of what that looks like when we're looking into the eyes of a recovered alcoholic. There's something different. They got healthy.
It's the second time in the book someone's talking about, not being able to recognize someone after they've had their spiritual awakening. I've seen this countless times, guys. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked.
Okay, really important paragraph to pay attention to. So the two men, as I mentioned, that went to court were Sebra Graves and Chef Cornell. And as I stated in the text that Howard gave me here, back to that. So he was remanded Ebby over to Roland and Roland wasn't in court, but the other two were, and Judge Sebra's alcoholic behavior get better. So he had hope and he wanted him out of Vermont. So it said they had told of some religious ideas. I just mentioned this first century Christianity fellowship, the Oxford group. Here is a timeline, guys, that was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident work. 2 months over, and he's preaching the good word. Why aren't we doing that in meetings all the time instead of talking about our dead cats? I mean, that is so important to get recovered. So vital that I study this big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and get to a higher power, God, whatever you guys want to call it. I call it God. One syllable word, nice and easy for me to remember. And then build a relationship with that power so that I can carry this message. You know, that's part of our 12 step also. So here he is, 2 months sober, starry-eyed look, something about his eyes. The chap seemed a little bit different. He didn't rant. In a matter of fact way, he told about the two men. So he gave his whole experience on how he got sober. Bill already knew his drunk-a-log, but the drunk-a-log wasn't really that important in this situation. What was important is, how do you get well? That's what I'm interested in, not how you got sick. Why? I read Working with Others. I like to follow that. I'm like, don't get me wrong, so they can relate. But I'm more interested in, how did you get well? You say that you drank like I drank, but I don't understand how you quit and how you stay stopped. Well, that's what he talked about here. In 2 months sober, he did it.
So he did no ranting. Yeah, I'm always looking for like the cues in the book for how I'm supposed to carry the message. And so whenever I read something like do no ranting, and a little bit later there's no lectures, I got to check myself on my behavior, right? Because I can rant and I can lecture with the best of them. What did he do though? As David was just talking about, in a matter-of-fact way, he explained. Remember what I said earlier? What he was like, what we were like, what happened, what we're like now. Bill already knows what Ebby was like. There's no need to get into that. He's telling Bill now what happened and what his life like is now. All right? So a simple religious idea that morphs into really step 2 for us in the practical program of action, morphs into what we now know as steps 3 through 12. But as David has taken great pains to talk about, that was 2 months ago. I love when the book has this period of time. And this came up a couple of weeks ago, and I'm remiss in posting our cheat sheet, guys. Sorry, I'll get that tonight or tomorrow, because we brought up a few weeks ago. Get through the steps with this newcomer quickly. So Ebby had a spiritual awakening in 2 months. He worked those steps, those tenets of the Oxford group, in some between 0 and 60 days, we'll say. I don't know exactly. I don't know the exact right timeline. Our buddy Terry's on here, and if you ever listen to him talk, he'll talk about how, as a sponsor, as a step guide, he moved guys too quickly, he moved guys too slowly, and now he's kind of figured out the Goldilocks, just right in the middle, and that's what we're all striving for. But one of the things that David and I are always talking about is we must hurry. There is a window of opportunity here. If we don't help someone get to their spiritual awakening quickly enough, they could die. It's quite simple. We must get recovered, and then we must stay recovered. I cannot sit here and tell you, nobody on this can, the exact number of days, the exact proper duration, but we know we got to move quickly. And as you go through the book, and anytime you see a timing or a temporal reference, it's very rare that the book says, take your time about this. Mostly it says things like, next, we moved swiftly, we moved urgently. All that language, there's a lot of imperatives to it. He, Ebby, come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless.
So some short paragraph, but a lot of good stuff in it. As David pointed out, this is Ebby sharing his experience, passing it on to Bill. If Bill would have it, gotta want it, guys. He's gotta want it. And then he was shocked, not surprised, freaking shocked. Then, but interested, yeah, because he's desperate. That's why he's interested. Why would he be interested if he wasn't desperate, right? And then certainly I was interested. So if he was interested, that makes him willing. And in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and a lot of the book, willingness is an action. So as we go on, I had to be, for I was hopeless. Had to be is another word for must in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Bill likes to litter the book with it. And I don't mean to use that language for litter, because it's so important that we know there are must, have tos, and had tos in the book. But another wording for that is I had to be. I was hopeless. Bill is starting to accept the fact that he's of the hopeless variety. That he can't do this on willpower. He learned that in the hospital, and he can't do this on fear, knowledge, or fear. Not going to work. Ebby is the demonstration in his life how you get well. And Bill's eyes are starting to open up to that. Just briefly, that window that Howard talks about is going to shut quickly, though, if we don't triage him. And that's what Ebby's doing right now.
David, how many musts, had tos, and have tos in the big book?
96.
Mhm.
Plus the ones that, like I said, had to be. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff in there, right? As I study more and more.
Is there a way to do this to work the program of recovery properly? I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. Yes, there's two ways to know if I'm doing the work correctly. Was I honest and was I thorough? Right? If I am thorough, I'm going to do all those must, have tos, and had tos. He, Ebby, talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat on still Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard.
So the only thing I'm gonna get, his grandparents, is my father's good-natured contempt. So he was raised by his grandparents. His mom and dad both bolted. I won't go into that history right now, but they raised Bill Fayette and Ella Griffin. And later on in the paragraph, he talked at the very end. It says they made me swallow hard. So all this spiritual, all this religious stuff, he's gagging on the God concept, right? He's like, See, the wonderful thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is you get to have your own conception of God here. We're not going to force anything down your throat, whatever it is, just as long as you understand that it's got to be a power greater than yourself. It's got to be a power, and it can't be a human power. So Bill's realizing it. He's starting to accept the fact that he's hopeless. And now he's got to become willing. Not there yet, but getting there close.
And what's expressed? So it's a little bit more. We're still in, what Bill was like. All of this stuff that's inside of him, these thoughts, these feelings, these attitudes, right? The guiding forces of his life. This is all he's ever known. He's never had the way to think about, this experience differently. He's being confronted for the first time with a possible way out by someone that he loves, a dear friend of his that used to drink just like him, drank worse. The solution being presented to him was religion. And so what does he have? He has immediate prejudice, right? He's got prejudging based on his experience, a lifetime of thoughts and feelings and attitudes. But what we're going to find out, right, is that his hopelessness is going to let him see through the light. It's going to outweigh these things. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. That goes back page 1, right? He was reading the doggerel on the tombstone. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I'd often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone.
So I do have a few definitions, and I also want to backpedal to the last paragraph. I did miss some definitions.
Please.
So proffered means accepted, and then temperance means abstinence from alcohol. So in the paragraph, it says, I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat. On still Sundays, way over there on the hillside, there was that accepted abstinence from alcohol pledge I never signed. And then for the current paragraph we just read, I have the definition for atheist, which is someone who lack of knowledge of God or in denial of existence of God. So I was not a person in denial of existence of God. I also have the definition for cipher. Cipher meaning void or nothing. So few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a void of nothing and aimlessly rushes nowhere.
Mm.
And then immutable means unchanged. So how could there be so much of precise and immutable law and and unchanged law and no intelligence?
Thank you.
So yeah, so Bill's not an atheist. He makes that statement there, but he is agnostic. And back to that past paragraph too, that Ashton brought up too. So religion, and I got this from Howard, and it's true for me too. Religion is a set of practices, strict guidelines, right? But spirituality is a set of disciplines. So in AA, there is no AA God, and there is no AA way to pray necessarily, or no AA way to meditate necessarily. I mean, there's suggestions on how to do that, especially when we get into step 10 and 11, and there's prayers throughout the whole book. Anytime that we see in the book that it says, we ask, we know that's a prayer. So Bill's talking about here, though, too, that he had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. So here's his admittance that there's the power greater than himself. He said this. He believes there's a power. How could there be so much of a precise, immutable law and no intelligence? So he understands the sun goes up and the sun goes down. Who did that? Somebody did that. Something did that. He understands that. So it's unshakable for him. But that's as far as he's gone. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beginning. It's a beginning. So the second step is also says, came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. Clear thinking when it comes to drinking or drugging. I will have clear thinking. So I should never have a problem with the second step if I've accepted the first step. Period. The end. If I'm powerless, I need power. That would mean that if you're sponsoring someone or I'm sponsoring someone and they say, well, I'm having a hard time with the second step, then we need to go back to one. We definitely need to go back to one. There's no doubt in my mind. So Bill is opening up his mind, letting go to some of his old ideas and prejudice. That's the second step, and his old thoughts, so he can have a relationship with power. So in 3, he can make a beginning.
And we give Bill a lot of credit for how he wrote the book, and was it perfect, from cover to cover? No. But is it damn good? You bet. So we see the opening of his mind in the way that he writes this paragraph. So I always believed in the power, capital P. So he's starting to transition his flow, right? From what he used to be like into who he became. So he's recognizing and giving respect to something greater than him, power with the capital P. I'd always believed in a power greater than myself. And as he goes on, he's talking about some of his heroes here. So his intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, lowercase, right? There's a little sort of writing strategery here where he's not recognizing these as higher powers. He's saying they're his intellectual heroes. These are the people that he looked up to reinforce his logic concepts and thinking, but not for any spirituality. I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. So he recognizes there's got to be something out there. So he's hopeless, he's powerless, he inherited all these prejudices, so many of them from his grandfather who raised him, but he still knew there was something out there. He just hadn't found it. I simply had to believe in E. Capitals, proper case, spirit of the universe, a power greater than himself, a higher power, who knew neither time nor limitation. Bill's dropping this on us right now. His God as he understands him. And he's going to tell us later. God, my God, our God, it's all limitless. I cannot have a limited conception of a God. I need an infinite God because I'm a very limited, finite person. Right? And I will keep myself trapped in a tiny little box of thinking and feeling and believing. But I get a working part of my mind. God comes and I let him in, work on a little practice of listening, talking. And all of a sudden, I've got unlimited power that gets wielded the way God wants me to, not in inappropriate ways.
Yeah, let me just say one more thing about that paragraph too. Because I like bringing up these musts that he's talking about here. The second to last sentence is that I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe, all capital letters there, and had as another must. So Bill is admitting his agnosticism. Boy, and David and Nancy, who's on this call, will tell you how intimidated I was by the 4th chapter in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous when we started doing this book. When we started studying this book, and we did it on Zoom first, then we went live, and now we're doing it again on Zoom, and we're doing it live. But what a spiritual piece of literature. Oh my goodness. Man, it allows me to let go of my old ideas. It gives me directions on how to do that and how to go for my prejudice and how I must do that if I'm ever going to have a relationship, what David pointed out, to have access with power 24/7, walking around freedom of the bondage of self. The question I always ask my guys when they're doing this work here is, how free do you want to be? Which is definitely a Mark Houston statement. And I'm okay with stealing all that stuff from whoever has anything that exhibiting some kind of a relationship with power. I want what you have. So these guys that came before me and are still going on today, it's all about the freedom of the bondage of self. And when I cannot open up my mind and I am closed off to the concept of a power greater than myself or my prejudices, I'm going to have on page 25, I'm going to blot out the consciousness of my intolerable situation the best I can, or accept spiritual help. Those are the only two options I got. And boy, oh boy, today, as David says, this is every time we go to treatment center, I'm taking spiritual help, hands down today, without a doubt. But boy, if I'm not done yet, I might think I can maybe beat this game, as Bill stated early in the pages. Bill is an example, a demonstration of what a real alcoholic looks like. I identify with his thinking, drinking, or feeling, and I can't beat the game either. That's why I haven't had a drink in a very long time, because I have a relationship with power today.
So a little bit more. What's the strategery of how Bill's writing here? Page 9 is all about, Ebby's not drinking. Ebby, talk to me about how you're not drinking. Okay, and we had a bunch of paragraphs about that. But then what happens in that last paragraph on 9, and then what's all page 10 about? Spirituality, spiritual solution. We have shifted away from drinking. No, we're going to come back to drinking. All right, we've got many more pages here. We're going to talk about the powerlessness, up through page 23, right? Our physical craving, and then our mental powerlessness, our obsession, 23 to 43. We have plenty more content. But Bill's already a paragraph and another whole page about our spiritual malady, our spiritual illness, and how important it is, right? That we straighten out spiritually first, so that then we can get better mentally and physically. So continuing on the bottom of 10. With ministers in the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory.
Well, life of ignorance or an alcoholic death. I mean, that's basically what I got there. So, here I became irritated. Well, doctor talks about that in the doctor's opinion, which is going to happen when I'm so cold sober. My mind snaps shut, closed-minded, my prejudices, my preconceived thoughts, or my opinions about something against such a theory. Other people's had this experience. And my experience with this is, if this worked for me, why can't it work for you? If you do what I did, you'll get what I got. It's not like this is unique. I gotta stop thinking when I get to the new guys. I gotta express to them that this is not unique. That millions of people have gotten sober and stayed sober. This is not a crapshoot. I remember being in treatment early on, and some crotchety old AA guy came to the meeting, and there was 10 of us safe in the group. This is in 1990s, and the guy says 9 out of 10 of you guys are going to relapse. And he might have been right, but that wasn't how it had to be, guys. It doesn't have to be like that. If I can concede to my innermost self that I'm a real alcoholic and understand that once I take a drink, that I break out in this craving. And then once I stop, I have this obsession in the mind without my consent, without my permission, I pick up a drink. And I'm suffering from this third fold of this illness, of this spiritual malady in my life. Then I have no problem with accepting step 2, that I need a power greater than myself, and it can restore me to sanity, which happens in step 10. So my mind did not snap shut for me because I became willing. And again, I brought this up 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago. Willingness in the big book many times is talking about action. If I continue to take action, this is not about what's coming out of my mouth, guys. I'm always watching my sponsee's feet. That's so important. And for me also, when we turn our thoughts to somebody else in the 10th step, typically and mostly my feet start moving in the direction of being of help to others. When I'm of help to others, I can't be thinking of me. Self must die, over and over again.
So Bill's still in his prejudices here. He's still in his old thinking, feeling, and attitudes. He's saying with ministers, so people are religious leaders and the religions themselves, I parted right there. So what is this? Prejudice. He's saying, nope, I'll have none of this. This is why he was aghast when Ebby said to him, I've got religion, because he's like, what? This thing that I absolutely loathe and disdain? Because why? Why did he part ways with them? Because when they talked of a God personal to me, so putting sort of Bill, he's what Bill's saying is the ministers are imposing on me who my God is, that he's love and superhuman strength, right? Omnipotence and direction. He became irritated because, who are we fundamentally? Dr. Silkworth told us, the alcoholic, when not drunk or high, is characterized by being restless, irritable, and discontented. So I became irritated, irritable, and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. Completely unwilling to consider religion because of his prejudices to date. He's going to have an open mind now, which is going to enable him to start to get a little bit better. Oh, here's Bill being magnanimous. To Christ, I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. So, okay, so this is me to a T too. So first of all, how big of Bill to say, oh yes, Christ, this guy who has, hundreds of millions or billions of followers around the planet. Yeah, he was a good man. Okay, thanks, Bill. Appreciate you signing off on that. And not too closely followed by those who claimed him. So full of judgment here. He's saying, okay, this Christ guy that I read about, yeah, pretty good dude. But everyone who believes in him, they're garbage. It's basically Bill's more flowered language, but that's what he's saying. His moral teaching, so Christ's moral teaching, most excellent. And again, guys, this was Bill's experience with Christianity. We're not selling any religion here, okay? For myself, as a deeply troubled, unmanageable, spiritually ill person, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient, easier and softer, and not too difficult. So, this is a wonderful example of take what you want and leave the rest. I don't know if any of you have been saddled by going to AA meetings where you hear this. It is among the worst suggestions you could possibly be given. The entire program of recovery to work in total is suggested as a course of recovery. This is not to be cherry-picked. We do this thoroughly and honestly if we want to save our lives. Cannot do that in Christianity, so I understand. I'm not a Christian, but I will believe my friends who are that it's to be done thoroughly and honestly as well. But, the rest I disregarded. This concept, this middle-of-the-road suggestion kills people. Take what you want and leave the rest. Do the steps you want to do. If I haven't said this before, I'm going to say it now, and I'm sure I'll say it 5 more times before we're through the book. The next time, if you believe in that, take what you want and leave the rest, or I don't need to do all the steps, the next time you fly on an airplane, suggest to the pilot that he skip one of the 12 landing procedures. How do you think that is going to go? Which suggestion are you going to tell him he can skip? Reduce the speed, Maybe he doesn't need to put out the landing gear. Landing a plane is a life or death situation for the crew and the 300 people on the plane. Recovery in the 12 steps are a life and death situation as well. This is not about being in the gray area, cutting corners. This is about following all the directions thoroughly and honestly. Why? So I can get healthy. So I don't have to be this jerk that Bill clearly was. And that I can keep paying it forward by helping other people.
So, yeah, Bill's like, I don't want to be redundant because David covered it all here, but like he's giving Jesus some credit here. Thanks for doing that, brother. You know, but
it's very big.
Convenient, yeah, very big of you. Convenient and not too difficult. But this is what the kind of relationship he has with that power. So it's a start. So let's not discredit that. It is some kind of a start. It's not going to be a sufficient enough one by any means, but it is a start. For myself, I adopted those parts which seem convenient. In my experience, if I'm not being inconvenienced in Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous, I ain't doing enough work. At least in my experience. I got to be sponsoring people. I got to have a service position. I got to have a home group. I got to be attending meetings, taking phone calls. I got to be doing stuff. This is not my vocation, but this is my avocation, and I get to do this. And I'm always doing something. You know why? Because someone told me when I first got sober, busy is a good thing. Because when I was living in my car and I thought that was busy, that is not so busy. This is busy today and not too difficult. So if I got somebody, so what I do with my sponsees is when they ask me to sponsor them, I want them to write the sobriety date in the front of the big book. But more importantly than that, I want them to write the date that we started working together. The date that I asked him, are you willing to go to any lengths? Because in the front of that book, he's going to write that date, willing to go to any lengths, September 13th. 2023, because on December 13th, 2023, when I ask him if he's taken a service position in his home group and he says he hadn't, I'm going to ask him, well, you said you're willing to go to any lengths. I have to be always willing to go to any lengths for my sobriety, no matter what. See, God doesn't take a wand and just go, dude, you're sober. I am responsible for this work here that's outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And service is part of the triangle I have to do. So I don't get to disregard it. And the last thing I'm going to say about that, and I hate this statement in Beanie, take what you want and leave the rest. Dude, don't do that. Don't do that. Take it all. You're going to need it. I'm not saying I can soak it all in, but man, oh man, I remember when I was like 10 or 15 years sober, a guy came in a meeting, he was taking notes, and I had to ask him afterwards what he was doing. And I'm not going to go into the whole backstory of the whole thing and how he titled everybody, your president, your vice president, you're this and that, because he didn't know. But what he did do was he was taking notes because he didn't understand anything about the meeting, about Alcoholics Anonymous. It was actually a Cocaine Anonymous meeting. And so my job as a recovered alcoholic was to take him aside and say, I love that you're taking notes. Not a problem. But I qualified him because I knew how fast that window was going to shut. He's still sober today, and he still carries his message today. So important.
The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me.
So I have a few definitions. So chicanery, by meaning deception. So the wars which had been fought, the burnings and deception that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. And then I also have grim, meaning horrible, and jest, meaning joke. So judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of a man, a horrible joke.
Good definitions. Thank you.
One thing I'm really going to add to that is, Bill was in the war. He was a second lieutenant in Norwich Academy, and he was mobilized as part of the Vermont National Guard. So he did go overseas, and he did say that. The last sentence on here is really important, though. If there was a devil, He seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. Alcohol had him. No doubt about it. You know, I had a buddy of mine who died sober 17 years. He got cancer and suddenly died. He was a wonderful, wonderful guy. Wonderful guy. I thank God for him. But he used to say, if there's a higher power, there's a lower power. And alcohol is that lower power for me. For a real alcoholic who can't stop once they start, and once they start, they can't control the amount that they drink and the spiritual malady. So alcohol is the devil, the boss, universal, and he had me.
If there was a devil, capital D, he seemed the boss universal, capital B, capital U, and he certainly had me. Whether it's the higher power or the proper case lower power, like David was talking about, Bill's in this moment, right, of conflict, recognizing something's leading his way around, and he cannot conceive of the fact that there's a higher power, a real loving higher power that has unlimited, infinite resources to lead Bill. All he thinks is, I'm a bad guy, right? And it's the devil that's got me chained and leading me around. Remember, stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, what we're like now. So circling back, again, Bill knows what Ebby was like, but how about a little more on what happened? But my friend sat before me, and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Doctors had pronounced Ebby incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, like Bill, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known.
I have the definition for scrap, meaning waste. So then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the waste heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known.
So just like in Bill and Bob's story, as they sat, and Bob was only going to give them like 10 or 15 minutes, they talked and talked and talked. Ebby talked and talked and talked. And thank God that he did, because he sat there and made the point blank declaration. There's no excuses, not making up excuses, not apologizing for anything. He says this, and we'll read about it in the 9-step promises. God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. This is black and white. This is the guy he drank with. Bill can't deny this now, because he's stating facts that Bill's identifying with. He drank like Ebby did, he thought like Ebby did, and he felt like Ebby did. His human will had failed. Bill knew that his will wasn't working. Doctors pronounced him incurable. David uses his analogy all the time when we go to treatment centers. You know, if you were going to go, you went to the oncology ward at the hospital near you, and they said, this is the worst cancer I've ever seen in my entire life, it's a death sentence. The gates of hell was shut on you. He's incurable. He's going to die from this thing. Society is about to lock him up. I just talked about that story that the judge was going to throw away the key and put him in an insane asylum. Like myself, he admitted complete defeat. This is a miracle that had happened. Page 30 says that we conceded our innermost self that we're alcoholics. You know, the first step in the big book says that we admitted we were powerless, and I don't, yes, I'm powerless. But we water that word down way too much in Alcoholics Anonymous. Boy, the greater statement for me is on page 30, they conceded my innermost self that I'm a real alcoholic. Why do I know that? Because I studied the literature up to page 30, including the 10 pages of the doctor's opinion. And like myself, he said, then he had in effect been raised from the dead. We are people who get to live two lives in one. I don't live the same life that I did almost 24 years ago. Man, my grandson turned 18 yesterday. He never seen me take a drink in my life. Never saw me stay out all night long. Never saw me lose a job. Never saw any of the things that I did or steal or do all the things that I did. Never got to. He lives with us every single day, and he's a fine young man. What a blessing to live two lives in one and be able to provide for someone who did. We lost our daughter almost 6 years ago and raised our grandson, which was a real blessing. To this disease, we lost our daughter, guys. Then he says that he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. This, I was in a meeting when I was like a year sober, and I was walking out of the meeting and had goosebumps, and everybody in the meeting had goosebumps, dude. We felt the spirit of God throughout the room. And this old timer, his name was Dean. He died with 40 years of sobriety. I remember going to his funeral, but he was a number of years sober. I'm a year sober, and I walked out of there, and he looked at me. He goes, "Pretty good." I go, "Oh my God, that was amazing." He goes, "Keep coming back, kid. It gets better." And what he meant by that, because he took me aside after the meeting, he says, "But you gotta do this work. You got to do this work. If you think you're going to sit in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and somehow through osmosis, you're going to get this thing, it doesn't work like that." So that's all I got on that.
My friend sat before me and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. He got to God. He did the work thoroughly and honestly through the Oxford group at the time. We do it through 12-step recovery now. To do what? To affect the promise of the 12-step, to have a spiritual awakening as the singular result of these steps, which then enables us to do what? Carry the message to alcoholics, to addicts, to other people afflicted, whatever fellowship you're from, and to practice these principles in all of my affairs, right? Human will had failed, right? Self-reliance failed me. Human people reliance failed me. Doctors pronounced them incurable, like David said, right? Beyond human aid. Admitted complete defeat. Fantastic. What a perfect way to start to get better. And that concept of complete defeat, that our second most important book, my opinion, the 12 and 12, starts with that. On the first step, who cares to admit complete defeat? Practically no one. But those of us who do then have the immediate opportunity to start to get healthy, right? Raised from the dead. You know, I'm repeating a lot of what David said. We're like a phoenix rising from the ashes to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. This is what people are always saying. This is what I'm saying. I won't speak about people. I'll speak about myself. When I say a life beyond my wildest dreams, it doesn't mean that I'm making more money than I thought, or that my marriage is better than I thought, or that my house is bigger than I thought, or any of those things. I didn't have any thoughts. I didn't have any dreams. I didn't have any visions. I feel great today in all matters, right? Inside my head, my heart, my gut. That's what it means to be living that kind of life. All right. All right. I'm going to wrap us up here. Click off.